Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending the SEA Development Seminar, Resiliency with the Military Veteran Panel. We're going to go ahead and let the panelists introduce themselves. I know there might be some bandwidth concerns, but if you don't mind turning on your camera, please do so. It's a lot easier to present to live faces than pictures. And also, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in chat, and we'll try to find some opportune times to go ahead and address those. So we'll go ahead and get started. Angela, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Tony. So my name is Angela Minichiello, and I go by Angie. And currently, I am assistant professor in the Department of Engineering Education in the College of Engineering. I'm not sure how much, Tony, you want me to say. I'll just suffice to say that I started in the military right out of high school. I went to the military academy at West Point. So I started at 18 and I stayed in the military until I was about 30. And then I got out and started an engineering career. And then now I'm in academia. So I've had 3 careers, and starting with the military. And I think all of those careers have been supported and made better due to my military experience.
Brian?
There's my mute button. So my name is Brian Kartchner. I actually work for the College of Natural Resources right now, but I am going to school as a PhD student over in the College of Education and Instructional Technology and Learning Sciences program. And I served for 6 years in the Utah Army National Guard. I deployed in support of Operation New Dawn in Iraq in 2011. Which was an experience. And as we kind of talk about the topic, there's a lot of things I learned from that experience in particular. But my interests are definitely in how do we support student veterans in higher education, and what strengths can we learn from and also incorporate into this experience.
Paul?
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, my name is Paul Klimack. 22-year Army veteran. I joined the military when I was 34, so I was kind of a late bloomer, but I did 2 years artillery, and then somehow 20 full years in recruiting. So 4 medications later, I'm here loving my job. What else can I say? Loved working with kids, loved putting, a lot of people in the National Guard. Retired not long ago. With 22 years. So I knew I wanted to do something after with veterans, and this job kind of came my way, and I'm just loving it. I just love the opportunity just to help veterans, get to their end game and just help them with whatever they need, including and mostly educational benefits. But the spectrum's pretty wide on that.
Okay. And I'm Tony Flores. I'm the director of the Veterans Resource Office. I spent a little over 3 years in the military as an airborne infantryman. I use it as a hiatus between my first time attending college and coming back to finish my degree. So that's why I picked a non-office type of MOS. So it was good times, but it was back in 94 through 97. So I was part of our last peacetime Army. I'm going to go ahead and host or moderate the event. I'm going to go ahead and ask questions, some that I'll say, I'd like everyone to answer, some that, you can choose if you want to answer or not. I think this first one is probably a good one for everyone to answer. And it's, how do you typically deal with stress? And does anybody have a preferred order? And I can go first real quick to kind of ease that, since, one of the things that I've learned in the military, it is really a military skill I developed, was really assessing what's causing the stress and how important was it really in the aspect of, I've got a pretty black and white system of dealing with stress. Is somebody about to die or not? And then I can function within those two categories, which really reduces the stress pretty quickly.
I can jump in right off that one too, because that was actually really close to my point as well, as prioritizing what I can actually actionably do. That was something, you know, after towards the tail end of my deployment, our chaplain stepped in and he pulled all us new guys who'd been there for the first time overseas. And he said, hey, one of the best things you can do is if you're feeling stressed, write down everything that you're stressing about, pick all the stuff that you can't do anything about, get rid of it, and then focus on the stuff and prioritize the things that you can actually do to address some of those stressors. And that was one of the best pieces of advice and pieces of training and experience I received from the military, is figuring out what is actionable. And that's something that has definitely carried on since my military service, especially as I've gone into working professionally and going to school.
And I would add on to that also, 20 years in recruiting, pretty stressful at times, but what I always like to do is just celebrate the small successes and set realistic goals. I mean, if you have a goal that you think is insurmountable, you know, you're going to get stressed. But if you have a small goal every day and you make that goal, then you can go to sleep at night and just celebrate the small successes you made. And that just kind of helped me deal with stress a lot better.
I agree on that point. I recently have been feeling a lot of stress with, you know, to-do lists getting bigger and bigger and not really feeling like I'm getting buried and not being able to get on top of it. And I do have this need to sort of feel like I am somewhat in control of my pile. And so I totally had to go back from the electronic calendar to the piece of paper where I wrote everything down, just like Brian said, and put them in groups. And then as Paul says, I could take my magic marker and physically mark them off. I really started to feel a lot better. So sometimes going back to those old tried and true methods are really helpful. The other thing I'd like to bring up, and I think in the military, it was sort of embedded and easier, is, you know, being active and being outside. But those two things are really important to help managing stress on a chronic or long-term basis. And I find that as I moved into jobs where I was sitting in a cube, or I was primarily not required to be, there was no PT, I wasn't required to do anything physical, I wasn't required to take a physical fitness test, and I had to be inside, that I thought back and I realized that, okay, I need to incorporate this in my everyday life. And so if I can get outside, even if it's not that hard exercise, just getting outside and just walking around really helps me sort of on a day-to-day basis.
Next question is, and really the key to our panel is, what is your definition of resiliency? And or what does resiliency mean to you?
I'm going to start. Oh, go ahead.
No,
Paul,
go ahead, ma'am. Go ahead, ma'am.
And it's funny because resilient is actually an engineering term. And so a lot of these things are we talk about these as opposed to materials and engineering, but to me, being resilient is a couple different things. It's being able to absorb setbacks with the knowledge that you're going to have failures, you're going to be set back. So it's ability to kind of absorb that and then bounce back to moving forward. And along with that, it's not just bouncing back, but maybe being adaptable in the way that you bounce back, being able to maybe bounce back in a slightly different direction so that you can, get around whatever obstacle or setback you had. Okay, Paul.
Yeah, I would just agree with that. During our resiliency training in the Guard, it was always just imagine a tennis ball being thrown against you just come back, you absorb it and you come back and, and that really put in perspective what resiliency is to me.
Did you have anything to add, Brian?
That's pretty much what I would say too. Just getting back up every single time you get knocked down and keep movement going. This just popped in my head. one of the first things I encountered as I started doing some research years ago on veterans is all the way back in World War II, they had bomber crews that they started doing some research on for shell shock. You know, what PTSD used to be called back in the day. And the results were really surprising. They're looking at these crews. I mean, in your crew, you'd have your pilot, your co-pilot, your bombardier, your navigator, all the people manning the guns and whatnot. And so you have a pretty good big group. And you'd think the folks that were doing some of these really dangerous jobs, like, flying the plane or, dropping the bombs or shooting the guns, would have greater amounts of stress and issues with what they're doing. But they found it was actually the co-pilot. And because the co-pilot was sitting there with nothing to do, their only job really was to take the controls as the pilot went down. And so their ability to function was reliant completely on everybody else in that plane. And they suffered far higher levels of PTSD than anyone else on a bomber crew. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there with resiliency, is that you can take control and you can get yourself to bounce back. You can be actionable about what you're doing and being intentional, regardless of what it is, and you feel like you have that control. I think that does great things for your ability to have resiliency, to be able to overcome those stresses and problems.
So that leads us to our next major question. What coping strategies did you utilize to help you with the challenges of military service?
I would just say, like I said before, realistic goals. One big thing is exercise, like was already mentioned. Another thing I found out was just venting. You have to vent sometimes. Of course, in the military, you vent up, you never vent down. But if you have a good peer, or maybe your commander, whoever, and you just have things to say, just let it go. And that really helped me sometimes too. At the end of it, did anything really happen? I felt better, probably not, but you still got to let steam off somewhere, else that anger just manifests itself in other places, which you don't want. So that's my 2 cents.
I just want to piggyback on that one real quick. Is you have to have your people. That whole being able to gripe. You need to be able to feel like you're accepted and you're part of a group of people who actually care about your griping, right? Like you need that sense of buy-in from everybody, which is I think that when you can really find in the military is you're all kind of in it together for the most part. And it's a little bit more difficult to find in the civilian world, but I think it could be something that could be built.
Yeah, it's so funny how our answers are very similar. I agree totally. And I kind of thought of it too as a sense of humor, that there's a very particular sense of humor, I think, that kind of manifests itself when you're in the military, and most people share it. And so you can get through a lot of stressful things by expressing that sense of humor to, like Paul was saying, horizontally with your peers. And I think before I got in the military, I was very much sort of a person that dealt with stress by myself. Like I reflected and thought, oh, I did all these things wrong and I have to fix this and this. But it was very much something that I never really wanted to share my setbacks or my stress, my stresses with other people. But after getting in the military, I think that's one of the big things that I got from it was, first of all, the recognition that it's important, like Brian said, to have your people, and that doesn't mean it isn't a negative thing to express your doubts or your concerns or your failures with your people. And nobody's, like Brian said, nobody's going to think less of you. And so I think I really learned that skill by being in the military, because you're always in a team environment. You're always with someone. And if you're deployed, you're always with many people, whether you want to be or not. And so I think and now I'm much more like that. I have to watch my sense of humor sometimes, depending on where I'm at. But I think that's the skill that I really learned is to involve other people in my trials, and it does really, and then you find that they're in similar situations, and you find how they're thinking about it, and it can really help you learn to think about it in a more positive way.
So, speaking of resiliency and coping strategies, compare a time, and I am changing these questions up a little bit as we move the conversation along, but when you first entered basic training or boot camp, and you had a failure versus now when you address failures, what are some of the things that really changed? What skills were you unprepared for and that you had to develop, and what skills now do you lean on?
Well, sorry. Go ahead.
So go for it. You go for it.
I was gonna say I took things a lot more personally before I got into the military. Like if I failed, it's a lot more of a personal thing. Like it's a reflection on my inabilities and sense of self-worth. But through the process of training and realizing that, man, failure is just a part of learning, and you fail to get better. And if you're not failing, you're not doing it right. And that's something that really struck home, and something that's really carried me through, especially in these current years right now where I'm working full time and I'm going to school pretty much full time every semester, and being able to balance all those stressors and things. And there's failures, like I'm dropping the ball here and there periodically, but I'm learning and I'm not taking it personally. And it's something that's been a huge benefit to me.
Yeah, same for me. I mean, I think that's been a big one. You kind of forced to, the other thing too is you're sort of forced to fail in public in a certain way, because everything you're doing is with other people. And so, and that's something that for for me, it was hard to get over. If I failed, I didn't want anybody to see it. And so I've really become much more, in a much more better headspace about failing, I think, because of it. Paul, did you have anything to add on that?
My situation was a little different. I went to basic when I was 34. So, I was 12 years older than most drill instructors. So failure didn't really affect me that much, but it was still personal. And it still kind of hurt. But now as you get older and you were in the military longer, I think just experience leads to you just remembering how you failed and how you learned from that. In the military, we have AARs, right? And what went well, what didn't go well, where we failed, where we excelled, what we can do better next time. And a lot of times in my personal life, I'll just do simple AARs at home too. And that's really helped me, deal with failure and getting over that.
And just to translate some of the jargon for everyone, military skill development is really based on a go or a no go. There is no, you got 80%, so you pass. There is a passing standard that's created. So either you pass, which is considered that your aptitude for the skill is, good or works, or you fail and it's a no-go. So there is no, the experience of failing is going to be, experienced multiple times in the military. And I think that reaches back to Brian talking about being able to accept that. And the other thing is where Paul talks about AAR, it's called an after action report. And what you do is you really evaluate the mission, the exercise, whatever it might be, and look at the things that were successful versus the things that were failures. With that, how have you translated these strategies you developed into civilian life? I know you touched on that a little bit, Paul and Brian.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
Well, for me, I've become so part of this too, I guess, is planning. And part of the military is also there. For every mission, there's a plan, and then there's backup plan and a backup plan and a backup plan. You just learn, and then usually it doesn't go according to any of these plans, and you're having to be adaptable in the moment. But that kind of ingrains in you that anything I approach, I just automatically, okay, here's my plan. Now, if this goes wrong, I'm going to do this. If this happens, I'm going to do this. so it's just led me into this habit of just always thinking of contingencies, to the point that drives my husband nuts, but I always had these contingency plans. And because I always felt like that let me be more adaptable and flexible in the moment. If I had already thought through, what's the major objective or what's the major goal I'm trying to do, and then if something changes, how can I adapt to that? And so, and just in doing that, it's a huge, it brings down your stress level about things that are that you're planning to do in the future that could have, because you have several different other ideas if things go awry that you can pursue. And so that's one strategy that I learned in the military as a pilot and have continued. It's just part of who I am now, and I continue to do it pretty much with all the tasks that I'm assigned.
Real quick, I just jump on what Brian said earlier. Prioritization, I think, is the key. And literally writing things down. I mean, sometimes I'll go home and just, what do I have to do today? Okay, I've got to, fix the furnace. I have to walk the dog. Well, you can prioritize if it's winter, which one you're going to do first. And if you don't get to all of them by the end of the day, you still go to sleep at night knowing you did as much as you could and you took care of business. And then that just rolls over to the next day. If it wasn't that important for that day, it'll be okay the next day. So yeah, prioritizing is a big part of my life, actually. Yeah, it drives my wife kind of crazy too, but I can't live without it personally, just prioritizing.
I'd have to agree with that too. And also having the contingency plans. I mean, there's always that backup plan. And I think as I think about, as Angie was talking about that, about my own experience, it reduces my stress levels dramatically. Knowing that if this fails, I got something else, cooking on the back burner, where I've got this other avenue to be able to approach that same objective that I have from a different angle, to be able to still kind of be moving forward. And so I think having that plan, and then and as a really tangible way, as I was thinking about this as we were talking, is I've actually adopted kind of a project management approach to prioritizing and figuring out what I need to accomplish. And also how to be able to deal with, all the stresses and stressors that hit my life. And so I actually use a tool called Trello. It's a free project management tool. And many of you probably know this, but anyway, and there's a lot of them out there. I mean, it's not just that one, but what I do is I use the methods called Kanban, Kanban. And it's basically based on Toyota's lean manufacturing method. Basically, you're only dealing with the things you have to deal with in that moment. And everything else is just kind of in this, this holding pen, and you're only pulling out the items that you need to address. And as soon as it's done, you move it out and then you just move one more item over into it to address. And this has been, especially trying to juggle so many things in life, family, work, school, which I know many folks are doing. It's made it manageable. I just say, I just don't even worry about this stuff. It's in my holding pen. I just don't even think about it. I just have these, 3-4 items that I just need to address, and they're the most expedient to address. And then you just move it over as it's completed. And so, I mean, that's, for me, is like a very actionable way that I've been able to apply what I've learned in the military, but also marrying it with some professional practices as well.
So the next question is how would you teach someone to build or learn resilience?
I can jump on that one real quick too again. And I go all the way back, like I mentioned earlier, about that chaplain and the tool that he gave us, and I would recommend this to anyone, was to just get a notebook. And if you're starting this out, this is where I really started to apply a lot of these things, but is to start writing down, listing out, sort of like Paul was saying, list out all those things that you got to do, or things that are bothering you, or things that are causing stress, or just the happenings of life. Just list it all out, just do a brain dump. Go through, line out all the stuff you can't do anything about, and then go through all the items that are left and figure out what you can do about them and what prioritization and steps you need to include. And that was probably one of the easiest, most actionable things that I could have done. And I did that for months coming home, just kind of trying to process everything that had happened and get back to the civilian life. And and it was an incredible tool. And it's something that, and I kind of talked about that trial thing. Basically, in a way, I kind of do that still, but using these professional tools. But it really will help be able to process and deal with the stressors and keep moving forward.
I would say also, I tell people, don't be your own worst enemy. Okay. Realize you're going to fail. I mean, it's going to happen, but don't look at it as failure. Look at it as an opportunity to learn. And that's what I would say mainly. No one's judging you, and don't judge yourself just by, a failure here and there. Just learn from your failures and go on. The world, I mean, we wouldn't even be here if no one ever failed in history. So that's what I would say.
I've kind of thought of this in like, what would I tell a young person, or what would I tell my children or something? It, like, based on maybe the mistakes that I made. So I think as a young person before getting in the military, I probably didn't do things that I was interested in because I thought I wouldn't be any good at them. And the military forced me to do a whole bunch of stuff that I never even conceived of. And some of I was good at and some I wasn't. And if I had to do it over again, I would tell myself to just get involved in things without, from a perspective of your interests and with your interests, and not focus so much on performance. I think performance is a little bit overrated and we get a little bit caught up in it. So that's one thing. And the other thing I would think would be to try to look at things from a perspective larger than yourself. So I think when you feel like when you're doing something that's for a bigger purpose than yourself, it's easier to do the best you can and not stress out about all the little things that happen along the way. So I really try to, I guess it's a sense of perspective, try to think about things from a sense of perspective. And have some faith in yourself that you can do hard things, and I think the military makes you learn that you can do a lot more than you thought you could. And I've learned that definitely. Whenever things when I think they're really tough, I think, oh, come on, I've learned that I can do stuff like this. It may not be fun, but I know I can get through it. So, so that's kind of what I think about when I think about this question.
And I think to add to, go ahead, Brian.
I was just gonna circle back around to one of the first talking points, is also, with all of that said from Paul and Angie, is find your people to do those things with, because there's gonna be times you need to gripe, like Paul was saying, or just having that support and that sense of belonging. And as I think we're thinking on some of the questions that we've talked about and some of the topics, but even trying to find that in your workplace environment will really help you, especially as you're looking at your work resiliency.
And I was going to add to that, that what you learn in the military is that physically you're going to do a lot more than you think you could. And really your barriers tend to be your lack of trust in yourself. So you quit not because your body needs to quit. You quit because mentally you decide, it's time to quit. And then the other part about that, talking about, we referred to them as bitch sessions in the military, was that, there are times that you're going to let go of the thing. Oftentimes it was stuff you couldn't control, right? You were assigned a duty, or you had something you had to do that you didn't necessarily agree with, or whatever it might be. You let it go with that group, your people. And the nice thing about it is you let it go, and then that was your release. You didn't think about it. You didn't focus on it. And the people you shared it with didn't take it as, oh, this is something I have to share with somebody else. So-and-so thinks this. It was really, hey, you know what? I need to get this off my back so I can focus on what I can control. And you're going to be my sounding board. And when it got said, it was done there, and nobody thought about it. Another question, or the next question is, how have you coped, practice resiliency during COVID-19?
Well, I've had to force myself to go outside to get exercise, even though I wanted to hole up by my computer or whatever all day, and I could. I really had to force myself to, as much as I could, get some other kinds of stimulation and to reduce the stress. And so I think that's a big one.
Paul?
What I did mostly, exercise when you can. I talk to my family a lot. It was a good opportunity to just talk to your family. We just don't talk to family enough. I mean, I don't really phone my sisters out of the blue. Now I do, but during COVID-19, it was just, I'm just going to talk to my family because the whole world's going through it, not just the United States. So most of my family's still up in Canada. So I would talk to them and it was kind of beneficial. It's kind of a weird thing to say, but I've never talked to my family so much during the COVID lockdown. So that's what I would say. Because they're really your best friends you're ever going to have as your family.
Also, another thing that is just accept that there's risks and that you could do your best to mitigate risks, right? And I think that's really something is, it's hitting it. I just had to remind myself is that every day I'm taking a risk, getting in my car and driving or doing certain activities. And that even with COVID, there are a certain amount of risks that I can mitigate, and then I can do the best of what I can take into account in my own life. All the other things that may be happening in the politics or in the communities or with other folks, I just don't have control over, but I have control over myself and what I do about the situation. And that's something that's helped me a lot as over the past couple of years with this COVID situation, just recognizing the risks and recognizing what I can do about the risks.
So that leads to kind of our next question is, as things have changed and they've been pretty rapid with COVID, were there times that you identified areas where you were not effectively utilizing your resiliency tools? And then how did you implement them and make a change?
With COVID, I mean, panic was the first thing everyone had. I got to do this, I got to do that. I don't know how, and I don't know how to do this, and so on and so forth. And then just little by little, you figured out, again, you prioritized. I mean, Zoom came along, Teams came along, and you realized that, this is definitely doable.
Yeah, I think that leads into sort of the not counting yourself out, or, not saying that the situation is totally impossible, that I'm just going to give up. Given a little bit of time, things can usually tend to, you can start to see ways to move and things that you can do. And I think that goes back to that trust, and that trust in yourself, and trust in, time makes things better typically. The other thing I think for me, what I started to do when we moved to COVID, and I'm an instructor, and it was like, okay, teach your course online now. And I felt like I knew what to do because I had been involved in online education before. And so I got very focused on what I needed to do, my list of tasks, my timeline, my fears about if I was going to get it done, or if it was going to be, how good it was going to be. And then once I started, I'm sorry, my video keeps popping off. It must be my Wi-Fi. But then once we actually got into, we had that week, then we got into teaching. I'm just going to talk because my computer's turning off my video. Then it became more like I started thinking, okay, there are other people involved in this, the students, maybe I had plans for what I was going to do in my course, but maybe I hadn't been taking into account the bigger picture and what, how I needed to change what I was doing in order to meet their needs and allow them to meet their own needs. And so I think I kind of got that tunnel vision again, and it took me a little bit of time before I realized, okay, I need to look outside. This is a bigger problem than just me getting my course online. And so, you know, I kind of went back into sort of an individual, and I had to look out again and recognize that I was still in a team. I was still, what I was doing was still for the greater good of the team. And so, so I had to make some corrections, so.
I'd have to agree with that too, to the degree of, you know, when the lockdowns really first hit, is I just wasn't talking to a whole lot of people. And all of a sudden you start, you know, when you don't have those interactions and that kind of those, you know, your people around you constantly, like it's hard to get out of your own head. And that was something I think it took a little bit of, you know, time to be able to go, okay, you know, how do I connect with others and how do we go through? I'm sure all of us have experienced that to some level, but that was something that was definitely one of the tools that was a little harder to adapt to the COVID environment when all of a sudden you're cut off.
So how do you, and you guys kind of touched on this, so it leads into this question is, how do you build organizational resiliency within your team's coworkers, departments? And then how has COVID-19 outbreak affected your organizational resiliency?
Well, I think my thoughts on this were two things. The first thing is, you know, is empathy, is that we do, in times of great stress, we, you know, we need to recognize that others are under great stress too. And we really need to, as leaders, we really need to take that empathetic stance and consider what others are, that we're responsible for, what others are going through, and remain always outward focused, maybe as opposed to inward focus. And I have one other thing, and I lost track of it. So if I remember it, I'll come back.
Paul or Brian?
I would just agree with the empathy thing for sure. Just realize that everyone else is going through at the same time within your organization, for sure.
You know, I'd have to ditto that. That's, you know, that's kind of, that whole thing is, I mean, the organization are, you know, workplace wise, it's your people, right? And if you don't have that, or that empathy, or that ability to gripe to each other and let it roll off your back, and all the other things we've talked about, you know, that's part of the resiliencies, you know, being able to offload all the junk so you can focus on the stuff that you can actually do something about. And you know, if you can nurture that and support that even in this environment, I think you could continue to have success.
I remember the other one was back to, you know, comments about bitch sessions and, you know, venting and all that kind of thing. Of course, there's probably an organizational appropriate way to do that, but I think as leaders, we can sort of make a culture, or try to help develop a culture where that's okay, and where people understand that, like Tony was saying, that I think sometimes people outside the military may be afraid to do that because someone might go say, well, so-and-so said, you know, and I think we need to work on building a culture where it's okay to talk. It's okay to talk about the realities, the struggles that we're having, to get some of the stress, you know, to let it go. It's okay. And figure out a way that we can do that in a positive way, but give people the space to be able to feel like they can do that at work. And I think not academia doesn't always allow that space to happen. So I think that's one place we could work on.
Something else we did in the Guard, well, everyone had their own recruiting teams, but what I used to do with my team, and every NCOIC did it, is you would just have team building events. Very important. You know, just leave all the work in your office and let's just go throw hatchets or whatever, go skiing or go fishing or whatever. A lot of times, you know, work would never even come up. If they want to talk about it, it's fine. But if they don't want to talk about it, just see if they can catch a fish. That was fine too. So we try and do something, you know, once a month for sure. And it was really good. And everyone, it's just surprising what other team members don't know about the other team members. That makes sense. And because you're always in a professional atmosphere, professional setting, when you get in a more in the wilderness, I guess. You just learn things about your teams that I think it's just really healthy.
And then one other thing that I'll add to those comments is, and we've talked about empathy and giving yourself grace and giving others grace. One of the best resiliency tools that I've tried to utilize with my teams is that, a good leader understands that things are going to happen that you're not expecting to happen. And how you react to that will really affect the team below you. And so oftentimes, you see it more in a civilian world, because I think, the evaluation of what really is a crisis isn't as defined as a life and death situation like the military provides you with. So I think oftentimes people will exaggerate an issue where if they just had a little bit more grace and empathy and just said, okay, understand the mistake was made, or, we identified this challenge, let's talk about how we're going to fix it, rather than it being a big issue. I think that changes a lot I think it empowers others to have resiliency as well. It goes back to the pass fail aspect of the military. When you failed, you weren't ridiculed per se because you failed. You were just told, hey, you need to go back and practice. And so I think that's one of the advantages. That's all of our questions. So if anyone has questions for us, we got the next 15 minutes or so to answer any questions anyone might have. We'll go ahead and turn it back over to you, Leslie and Kelly Lou, to move on if we don't have any questions.
Yeah, thank you much for joining us today, and thank you for your service. I actually do have a question, maybe for Angie. So you spent quite a bit of time in South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Honduras. So what was the cultural experience like? The people, the food, the language, like some of the rituals? What did you enjoy the most? And what was the most shocking to you?
Oh, wow. Well, I have to say the most shocking was really Saudi Arabia and Iraq, and seeing the landscape, seeing camels up close, seeing Bedouins, living out there. And flying, endlessly over sand, and having your navigation systems not work because we didn't have GPS back then. So all that seemed the most like out of the ordinary and just different. Now, as far I had in South Korea was my first assignment, sort of out of flight school, and it was amazing first assignment because I was scared. It was very scary, but the food was wonderful, and I think we got to interact with actual South Koreans more in that place than any other place. We were just in a camp, and so right outside the camp was the town, and so we did a lot more things in the local environment than we did. I think definitely in the Gulf War, certainly. And Honduras was cool because we got to fly to the it's a smaller country, so we got to fly to the coast. We flew over the jungles. So again, the landscape, and then we were doing a lot of humanitarian work. So I flew Chinook, so we were flying large building materials around for them, and so we got the sense of that we were helping them reach certain goals, and so that was sort of special in that way. So they were all different, but I really appreciate the chance to been in those locations and seeing the different cultures and the different geographies. It was really interesting.
Thank you.
So I have a question for those of you that are still on the call today. How many veterans do we have attending this session? you want to raise your hands, let's see. So Tanner, Karina, veteran spouse. Sure, raise your hand for your husband, Allison. Great. I was just curious to see how many we had on the call. I do have another question as well for any of the panelists that would like to share. I guess I want to know how you would like, and if you like, others to thank you for your service, and how you prefer that comes across, and also maybe some ways or methods that others who are not veterans, or maybe who don't have a great understanding, can be sensitive to maybe some of the thoughts you have or experiences you've had in their interactions with you.
So I would say that, saying thank you for your service, it depends on the individual receiving the thank you. Some people don't like it. Some people like it, and some people, are indifferent. It's a hard subject to address, because there is no correct or definitive way to say, thank you. Because what you're doing is you're thanking them for something that you're not fully aware of what they did, or where they were. And so I think sometimes, depending on individual experiences, it's hard. But I also understand the sentiment that, comparing it to Vietnam veterans who were, ignored or treated negatively, it's a good thing trying to move in a positive direction. And then your second question, one of the biggest things, and it's just because it's media based and stuff, is that not every veteran was in combat, but also not every veteran that was in combat, or not every veteran in general, is Rambo either. That's, they're angry at the world and ready to blow everything up. A lot of individuals with PTSD, while they're dealing with it, they're not, building bombs and ready to destroy the local sheriff's office. So I think getting that perspective changed would be helpful as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. On a personal level, when someone says thank you for your service, I'll just say you're entirely welcome, and we'll just kind of leave it at that. What I try to do, and what other civilians should probably try to do, if you see someone wearing, a Iraqi freedom hat or a Vietnam veterans hat, I'll always go out of my way, even if it's across the parking lot, just to shake their hand. That human contact, thank you for your service, and then that's about all you can say, and they really appreciate that, I think.
Yeah, I really like, Tony and Paul, what you've said. I think it's a hard subject, and if I'm trying to answer this honestly, sometimes I feel I certainly don't want to be pulled out as as a combat veteran or something like that. I definitely like to keep my experiences on the down low. And if someone says thank you, I appreciate the sentiment, just like Tony said. I don't know what the right words would be, but I think that's, if you're going to say something, that's probably the good thing to say. It's weird. What I appreciate are things like when I was a cadet and I had to fly home in my uniform, and they would give me a first class seat, or, something where I didn't, where somebody could show appreciation in a way that was like, not necessarily honoring me per se, but honoring the idea of someone in a uniform, or someone, serving. Or like, I went to Lowe's the other day and I noticed they have a veteran parking space. I've never seen it. I've never seen any other place. I've seen a lot of different special parking spots, but I was like, oh, I'm going to park there. And it was just kind of fun, so I think, organizationally, maybe things could be done so that individual people didn't feel like they had to do things, but that that veterans could be given a little bit of visibility and a little bit of, honoring, for lack of a better word. So I don't know. That's just the way I feel. It's a tough one. I don't know if I don't know the answer exactly.
I just have to say that amen to all that was said, but that's a tough question because I was like, well, there's times where I'm like, oh, okay, say thank you and you're welcome. And there's other times where I don't feel necessarily like I was that hero. I was just doing my job, and I'm sure there's a lot of veterans who are out there just that, I just did my job. I got paid to do this. I got trained to do this. And just like other folks who, take time and effort to go into some other kind of field. But there's moments too where you definitely feel proud about what you did and accomplished. And so even as like on a personal level, like it fluctuates. It's like, how am I feeling about, my particular, identity as a veteran at the moment. But I also have to say, I love the Lowe's parking spot. It's right by the doors. Awesome. Anyway, I agree with everything everybody else has said on that.
Thanks for your insights on that. And go ahead, Tanner. Thank
Leslie,
you.
if it's okay, if I could just kind of share a personal story. So
Of
in
course.
my experience, so I was active duty military for about 5.5 years myself. And something that I realized is when people come up to you and they do thank you for your service, sometimes they'll have a personal story about their son who's in basic training, or a grandfather that recently passed away who was a veteran. And what you are is you're a symbol for them of that reminder of usually a family member who is serving or has served. So you just take it in stride. Something that I used to do is I'd carry an extra Velcro American flag that we wear on the uniform. So if ever like a kid came up and said, thank you for your service, you just take the flag and ask them, hey, what's your name? How are you doing? And you give them the little American flag. And that small gesture, is something that could mean the world to that little kid who sees you as a hero, even though personally, I was HR. So, I do HR now, but to them, it's more about what you symbolize. So that's kind of what I got from all of those experiences.
Tanner, that is awesome. Thank you. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, that was well said too. I was like, wow, that just sums it up. Good job.
Thank you.
Hey, Brian, I had a question for you. You mentioned something about Toyota's lean manufacturing. I believe it was a Kanban system. Can you please kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think it really does have some elements of resiliency built into it, but even just as a method to be able to optimize your workflow and your collaboration with team members. And it really is, it's a very, 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 very simple system. Basically, you have kind of your holding pen of all the things that you need to accomplish or all the stressors that you're dealing with. And then you have basically 3 columns. If you can do this in a spreadsheet or in a program like Trello, it's spelled Trello. If you ever want to look at it, it's free to use and it's a great tool. And basically with Trello, for example, you create little cards, and these cards in each of your, I just always make them in my holding pen. And these cards, you can add, things like notes. You can hook it up to your Google Drive. You can add checklist items and things like that. And you can drag and drop it wherever you want, like hierarchy-wise or in different columns. So basically, you just create a collection of all the tasks or all of the stressors or anything, however you want to use the system, right? You create your column, and then you have, that's just your holding pen or your to-do. I usually just name it to-do. And then you have your current work column. And you want to keep it pretty small because once again, don't overdo it. You don't want to have a bajillion and one things to just pulling you every single way, and you literally just prioritize one at a time. And the nice thing about the cards, you kind of drag them, drop them by hierarchy, even within the columns. And so you could kind of bump at the very top, like this is the number one thing I got to get done today, or the number one stressor I need to address. And you work through it. And then as soon as that one is done, you move it over to completed. Like have just another column called completed, just move it over and then move one more item back into your thing. And that's just a way to be able to help differentiate all the tasks, all the stressors, everything that you have in your life, and just be able to focus on the ones that you need to accomplish in the moment, and that will have the biggest impact on what you are currently doing and experiencing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else have any questions before we end the meeting today? All right. Well, I'm going to take that as a no. I just want to say thank you to everyone on the call for being here today. I especially want to thank Tony, Brian, Paul, and Angie for your time and for your service. I hope you take that in a good way coming from me. And again, thank you so much for your time and for all the things that you taught us today. I definitely learned a lot from this session today. So I hope you all have a great rest of your Thursday and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.